Hello, this is Ed from Wise Up. First off, thanks very much for coming onto the website to check out what we've got. Obviously, you've come onto the student finance session, but there are lots of other sessions on there that we hope you're going to find useful. So please take a minute or two just to check what else is around, and if that can make a difference to you, then we've done our job. So, right, we're going to be having a little look at student finance and the real cost of going to university. Now, this will be of special interest to years 12 and 13, especially 13, because obviously that's probably for most of you going to be the next stop. But you're probably in this type of group of people. And the quote is that 77% of participants are worried or put off by the costs of attending university, and only 23 were not concerned by the costs. Now, given where we currently are in the world and with rising costs everywhere, I wouldn't be surprised if that 77% was now nearer to 85 or even 90%. So if you are one of those people, please don't fret, and you're not alone. Hopefully at the end of this session, as we go through, we'll tell you exactly how the support you're going to get is going to come around, how you're going to apply for it, and what a difference it's going to make to you going forward. And of course, if you've got any questions, if this was a live session, we could answer them there and then. But if you've got any questions at the end of this session, please get in touch with us through the website, and we'll sort of allay any concerns that you've got. So what are we going to cover today? Well, we're going to look at the different types of options that are available to you through support. Those are going to be in the forms of grants and scholarships and bursaries as well. We're going to explain what those are and how you can go about getting them. Then we're going to look at tuition fees and living cost fees, the basic generalisation of student finance. We're going to look at how we're going to repay those costs and what the terms of repayments are going to be for most of you. So at the end of it, you will have a very clear idea of how much your journey through university is likely to cost, what the interest affecting it is likely to be, and how you're going to be paying it back and how long for once you graduate. So all of those things, hopefully, we're going to be covering. So there's two main types of support that you are going to get as you go through university. The first one will be grants, bursaries and scholarships. The beauty of these things is that they are not repayable. So whatever you get, they're yours to keep. You won't have to pay those back at any point in the future. Now, they are quite difficult to get, but there are lots and lots of options, and we're going to show you how you can find out what those options are as we go through, and that will be the point where we're going to start. But after that, we are going to look at student loans, student finance, and these things are obviously repayable, but they are accessible to everybody. But depending on your personal circumstances, you will get a different amount potentially to your friends. So be prepared for that one to come along. And it's worth pointing out that your application for your student loan will go to a company called the Student Loan Company. Please don't take too much notice of that name. It is actually the UK government that will be paying your student debt and giving you the loan for that debt. And it will be the UK government that you will be repaying to as well. Now, the basics of applying for support, you will actually start most of this about February. If you're in year 13 now, it'll be next February. So February of the year that you are going to be going to university. Now, things like grants and bursaries, you can start looking around for straight away. You can be in year 12 and start thinking about those as well. But if we're looking at just student finance, so your student loan, the earliest you're going to be able to apply will be February of the year that you go to university. And when you do that, you will probably be told that you need to get your application in by May. Now, I wouldn't pay too much attention to that. That is there really so that the student loan company can ensure that they get all of the money in the right place at the right time for when you start. But if you are somebody that makes up their mind quite late, and it might be after May and it might be after you get your A-level results, that's absolutely fine, because you will not miss out on the opportunity to get student finance. It just means that it might not be in the right place at the right time, and it will be backdated. So it might give you a little bit of a cash flow issue, which we can sort of address through a budgeting workshop that we've got elsewhere on the website as well. And we can tell you whereabouts to look for that little bit of help as well. So the process for your student loan application will begin there in school or college. It's all going to be done online. There is no paper forms anymore. It's all online access through the student loan website. So I said it begins there in school or college. That's because you will need to get your folks involved when it comes to the amount of household income, which does have an effect on the amount you can borrow, because they will have all of the details that you will need. So you will probably finish your application back at home with your folks around you, and provided you've got all of that information that you need, it will take you probably somewhere between 40 minutes and an hour to complete everything that you need to do. Now, unfortunately, your application only lasts for 1 year. So even if you know you're doing a 3-year course or a 4-year course, it doesn't really matter, because your application only lasts for the year that you apply for. So you will have to reapply every year of your degree course. Now, please don't fret about that. Provided your circumstances or your folks' circumstances haven't changed, it's going to be a mouse click. So it's going to be 10 seconds to reapply for the 2nd and 3rd, 4th years. If your circumstances or your folks' circumstances do change, however, please ensure that you update your records on the Student Loan Company website so that everything is up to date when it comes for the reapplication. It won't affect what you get that year, but it might well affect what you get in future years. The reason I say update it straight away is purely and simply you will have a lot on your plate over the coming few years. There's very, very easy to forget that you need to update those things. And by updating it, it might mean that you get more support. It could be that it's less, but it could be that it's more. So please keep the records accurate. Okay, so before we go into student loans, let's have a little look at grants, bursaries and scholarships as well. Right, so if we start off, you are going to be using UCAS for your grant search. Now, let me just tell you a story going back a few years. There was a company called Grant Fairy, and they produced an app which searched for every single possible grant that was available to each individual, depending on their circumstances, where they were going to be studying, when and where they were going to be living. There are too many to try and do that manually, so this was a really, really useful app, and it was quite cheap. It was I think it was about $2.99 a month, and you probably needed it for 4 months. But what happened was it was so popular that it was actually bought, and it's now available through the UCAS website for free. It's not called Grant Fairy anymore, but you can certainly see where the influence is on the search engine on UCAS. Now, let me give you an idea of some of the things that Grant Fairy, when it was in its previous guise, threw up when I checked out some different grants that are there. Now, if you happen to like singing and you want to sing in a choir, and if you're happy to go down to Exeter University, there could be a grant of £3,500 available to you for singing in the Exeter choir. Don't just think you're going to be able to turn up once, get your £3,500 and never go again. They're not that silly. But if you are really serious about your singing and you want to join a choir and you do like the idea of Exeter, £3,500 worth of grant. If you have a surname of Graham and you want to study at one of the Scottish universities, there could be a grant of £500 for you from the Graham Trust. The story behind that is that there was a gentleman, Mr. Graham, let's call him, who made all of his money. He had no direct family, so he left his money in trust for all of his wider family, people with the same name as him, when he died. Now, anybody with that name can just apply for £500 just for having the surname of Graham. Esports are becoming more and more popular. Now, if you actually are taking a degree in esports, there could be up to £1,500 available for you as a grant. And remember, all of these grants that you can get means that it's less money you're going to need to borrow when it comes to your student loan. And it's not just you that has an effect on your grants that you can get. Your parents could have an effect on that as well. For instance, depending on what job they do, there may be a grant available to you. Now, I've just picked one out here. So if your parents actually work in the Navy, potentially you could get up to £3,000 of grant just by virtue of the fact of the career that your parents are in. Don't just think it's about Navy, it could be all sorts, so check that one out. And finally, if you are a vegetarian, and I'm not quite sure how you prove that you're a vegetarian or not, but let's say you can, and you are a member of the Vegetarian Society, there could be a grant of up to £500 waiting for you as well. So those are some of the things that threw up through Grant Fairy, which is now available, not in that name, but through the UCAS website. Now, what about if we start then looking at scholarships? Well, scholarships are chunks of money given to you by the faculty of the university or college that you're going to attend. Everybody can apply for a scholarship. There's no limit to scholarship applications. Not everybody is going to be successful, obviously. And if you are successful, it will probably only last it will only last actually for the length of your course. So you can't reapply for the second year and the third year. You would get a one-off payment. Now, that could be anything from between a few £100s to several £1,000s. So it's definitely worth applying for. And there's scholarships for lots and lots of different types of people, maybe musicians, sportsmen, actors, low-income families, very high achievers. All of those type of things have a scholarship there for you. So everybody's entitled to apply. Please don't miss out. And the final thing I want to speak about are bursaries. Now, bursaries tend to be given to you by companies. And the companies could pay up to 100% of your costs. So these are really, really useful. They shouldn't be confused with degree level apprenticeships. They're not the same thing. So when you get a bursary, it is the company that is employing you but putting you through university. So it's alongside your job as opposed to the apprenticeship where it's an integral part of your job. So when you're doing your apprenticeship, you're learning from your trade from people in there, and then you're doing some night school as well to bring yourself up. With a bursary, you're doing full-time education, but then you're working for the employer during the holidays and afterwards as well. Now, the biggest bursary giver over the last 70 years has been the NHS, closely followed by the armed services. And the NHS, going back several years, were giving 100% bursaries for a very, very wide range of different degrees. Now, there was no repayment on these bursaries, but the way that you actually then paid for that money was that you gave that employer a certain amount of years' service after you got your degree. And certainly with the NHS, there was a very, very nice arrangement whereby you worked off your debt on a pro rata basis. You didn't pay any money, but you paid it back in time work for the employer. And if you wanted to leave, you could pay them back on a pro rata basis. And for those people that don't know what that is, let me explain. Let's say your bursary was £25,000. And to pay that off, you were expected to work for 5 years for the NHS. So although you didn't pay any money back, each year that you worked, in effect, paid back £5,000 of your debt. £5,000 per year for 5 years, that's your £25,000 repaid. Now, if you wanted to repay some money early, it means that you could actually move away from your contract with the NHS. So if you wanted to leave 2 years before your 5 years work was up, so you just then paid them £10,000, everyone was happy and you walked away. Now, unfortunately, with cuts over the past 15 years, the amount of bursary is no longer 100%. It goes up now to around 60 or 70%. And the number of degrees covered is much more narrow. It's no longer a wide range of degrees. It's very much smaller. So what's happened is that Private employers are now taking the place of the public employers like the NHS and the armed forces. So places like banks and insurance companies and accountancy firms, they are all offering bursaries. So you would be expected, again, like the NHS, to work for that employer for a period of time after you got your degree to pay back the faith and the cash that that employer had invested in you. Now, this looks really, really good, and many of these are. But what I want to tell you is one small story that I found out about one of the high street banks. When I rang them up to ask about this bursary, I asked them if there was any way of buying yourself out of your contract in exactly the same way that you did with the NHS. Well, yes, you could buy yourself out of the contract, but unfortunately it was not on a pro rata basis. You had to repay everything that that employer had paid you over the period of time you were at university. That could be £90,000. So, whilst I'm not saying that everything is like that and not everything's bad, what I am really urging you to do is ask lots and lots of questions before you accept a bursary. Find out how long you've got to work for the company after you get your degree. Find out if you want to leave the company, how much is it going to cost you? And maybe if you don't get all the answers that you want, it might be better to get into some student debt rather than getting into no debt, but working for a company that you really don't like for a couple of years just to pay off your time expected by that employer. Okay, so that's grants, scholarships and bursaries. Now, there is another allowance that you could be given, which is non-repayable, and that comes via the student loan company, and that is for disabled students. And that doesn't just mean physically disabled, that could be people with learning difficulties as well. Every case is looked at individually, so I can't give you any rules of thumb, but those are the figures, the maximum figures that are available currently. So if you fall into that category of disabled student, it is definitely worth asking if there is any allowance available for you to cover those types of things that you can see on the slide at the moment. Okay, so that covers grants, bursaries, scholarships, and our disabled student allowance. Now we're going to go on to student finance itself, the student loan, if you like. Now, you can think of your student loan in two parts. One will pay for your tuition fee and one part will pay for your living costs. But we're going to cover this separately. So we're going to start with tuition fees. Now, the amount of tuition fees that you can be charged will vary depending on the type of course that you're going for. Now, one of the things that's coming in recently and is getting more and more popular is something called an accelerated course, which is just a 2-year degree course. And for that, the maximum that you can be charged currently is £11,100 per year. That's more than the headline full-time course of £9,250. That's for a minimum 3-year course. So if it's an accelerated 2-year course, 11,001, 3 or 4 year or even 5-year courses, 9,250 is the current maximum. If you decide to go for a part-time course, then the maximum goes down to £6,935. Now, what is worth pointing out, that although you can shop around and you may be lucky enough to find a course that is cheaper than those maximums that I've just showed you, whatever the cost of your course is matched by the loan of the tuition fees. So in other words, you can't find a course for £9,000 and then borrow more than £9,000. You can of course take less, but you cannot take more. So you find something for £7,000, you can only get a loan up to £7,000. If you are lucky enough to find a course that is cheaper than the maximum, and the university has been getting some really good results, it may have been given by the government something called Teaching Excellence Framework, TEF. And if that university has been given TEF status, it means that it can raise its fees in line with inflation every year until it reaches the maximum ceiling. It still can't be more than the maximum ceiling, but it can raise it without asking the government in line with inflation until it gets there. And finally, the tuition fee loans are not paid through your bank account. You do not have to pay them yourself. They are paid direct to the university, and they are paid a quarter at the beginning of the first term, a quarter at the beginning of the second term, and half at the beginning of the third term. So I think that's fairly straightforward. Hopefully that clears up the idea on tuition fees. Now, next we're going to be going on to the loan that you might get for your living costs. And the first question I want to ask generally is, who's planning to stay at home with their parents? Now, my guess is not very many people. It's normally less than 5% of any year group. But if money is tight and if you are really keeping a very close eye on your budget, this is still definitely the cheapest way to get your degree. So please don't go into this with no thoughts at all about staying at home. If money's tight, this is still worthwhile thinking about. If you're going to be moving away, you need to think how much it's going to cost to live in student halls. Now, it's definitely worthwhile doing a little bit of research on this because it will vary hugely from one area of the UK to another. I've done a little slide coming up next to give you an idea of just how much these fees do vary. Now, the cheapest place that you can go to get your degree currently is Huddersfield in a shared room. You will only be paying £280 a month for that room. Now, you will be sharing a bathroom with more than one student. You will be sharing cooking facilities with more than one student, and your living quarters will be shared as well. You will be sharing a bedroom with one other person. But that is the cheapest place and the cheapest way to get your living costs down. If you want to go to the other extreme, a single large room in one of the London universities has a current cost per month of £1,620. Now you can see there, even that same university has something as low as £480 if it's shared. So there is something in there hopefully for everybody. Please don't just think though that you will only have to pay whilst you're at uni. The chances are that you will have to pay either side of your uni term times as well. You might get some leeway on that, but very often you will have to pay during holiday times as well. That especially is true once you leave student halls and go into your own accommodation. So let's have a look at the loans that you can get for your living costs per year. Now, if you do decide to live with your parents, then you get a maximum of just over £8,100 a year or a minimum of just over 3.5. Now, those are the two extremes. I'm going to explain to you at the end of this exactly what you need to be doing to get the maximum and what you need to be doing just to get the minimum. So that will all become clear. But for now, just accept that the two extremes for living at home with your parents and studying locally, 8,002 just under maximum, 3,006 just under minimum. But remember, very few people want to go down that route. If you are going to be leaving home and living and studying somewhere in England but not London, then the amounts go up, but not hugely. Goes up to a maximum of 9,700 and a minimum of 4,500. Now, if you want to live and study in London, they go up again. Maximum of 12,700 or just under and a minimum of 6,300. But let's think about each of these different scenarios. If you're living at home, you've got no rent, you've got no bills, most of your food's going to be covered. So your loan, whatever it might be, needs to cover your travel costs, your equipment, your clothing and socialising money. Definitely doable, especially if you've got a part-time job as well at home. If you are moving away, although you are getting more money, you have to then pay all of your own rent, all of your own bills, buy all of your own food, still cover your travel, your equipment, your clothing and socialising money. So even if you're on the maximum figures that we see here, it is still going to be extremely difficult. And the chances are you will be expected to add to that amount of money, possibly through a part-time job. Now, if you are looking to work, please don't think you can turn up the week before your course starts and get a really nice job in Wetherspoons doing the shifts that you want to do for the money you want. It doesn't work like that. There are less jobs available. There are more students going for every job. So if you are looking to work, don't leave it to the last minute. Get down to that university town as soon as possible and find yourself a job that's going to keep you nicely covered when it comes to costs. Now, the other thing that's worth mentioning at this point is that if you get a loan, which is different from the maximum. So let's take for example. So let's assume that you're going to be living and studying outside of London. You are given a student loan to cover your living costs of £8,000 per year. So that's less than the maximum of 9,706, but more than the minimum. There is an expectation from government that your parents will pay the extra between the 8,000 that you are able to borrow and the maximum figure, whatever that may be, in this case 9,706. So your parents will be giving you £1,706 every year. The difference is nobody has told your parents, so you need to have that conversation. It is extremely possible that many parents will not be in a position to give you that support. And if not, you need to start thinking about that sooner rather than later. And it might well be that you have to start thinking less about where do I want to go and now how do I afford it. And you might have to spin that around somewhat and say, this is what I can afford, where can I go within that budget? The same way that everybody at the moment is looking at their costs and looking at their finances, you are going to have to do exactly the same thing. Right, I mentioned earlier this maximum and minimum, and I was going to tell you how you can get the maximum, how you can get the minimum. Now, the way that's done is that your household income has a huge effect on your amount that you're going to be allowed to borrow for your living costs. For you to only get the minimum amounts that we were speaking about, your household income needs to be more than 58,250 if you are living at home, more than 62,300 if you are living away from home but studying outside of London, or more than 70,000 if you are in London. For you to get the maximum figures, your household income needs to be less than £25,000. So let me explain now what I mean by household income. So yes, it's salaries of everybody that is putting into that household. But it's not just salaries. It's any pensions that's coming in. It's any benefits that's coming in. It's any rental income that's coming in. It's any interest on savings accounts that's coming in. It's any dividends on share portfolios that's being held. In actual fact, it's pretty much everything that comes into the house before tax. So gross before tax. And that all goes into making your household income. Remember, your household income needs to be less than 25 grand for you to get the maximum loan. If it is more than 58,250, living at home, 62,300 outside of London, or 70, then you will only get the minimum. And it doesn't matter if you're on much, much higher than those figures, you will still get the minimum. Now, your loan can be affected a little bit by some other circumstances. Firstly, if you've got other siblings or maybe nan and granddad are living at home, so other dependents are living at home, then those figures that I've just given you will change and go up slightly, but it is only slightly. A couple of brothers and sisters might make 3 or 4 grand's worth of difference, but not huge. There are 4 other ways that you can affect the amount of money that you can borrow. First off, trust me, is not a cost-effective way. Having your own child is not a good way to get a bit of extra income when it comes to living costs. I think at the last look, to have your own child cost you somewhere in the region of £250,000 by the time they were 16. The numbers don't add up. If you are a full-time or part-time carer, but you do need to be registered, you may be eligible to borrow some more money. If you are registered disabled, that could be learning difficulties, that could be physical disabilities, then not only do you get the extra grant that I spoke about earlier in the topic, but you could also get some extra money to borrow as well. And the only other way that I know is if you are living at home when you come to make your application, then you could borrow some extra money as well. So those are the 4 ways. Okay, so now we know how much we can borrow. Let's start looking at how much we will have to pay back. So we have to obviously pay back whatever we borrow, but I'm afraid interest is started to add onto your loan as soon as you start to borrow the money. So what do the interest elements cost? Well, for you guys, you are going into a new scheme. So you will be paying less in interest than your predecessors. So that's a positive. You will be paying in interest a rate that's equivalent to the retail price index, so inflation as measured by the RPI. And that is fixed once a year for the next academic year. So next April, all you guys that are in year 13 will know what the interest rate is going to be for your student debt in the first academic year. The next April will be the fixing for the next academic year, and so on and so on. Now, obviously, I don't need to explain to you that at the moment inflation is running away. So we're already up at 12%. It was fixed last April already at 9%. So technically, that's what you would be expecting to pay in your first year. Now, the government have recognised that 9% is a hugely penal interest rate that you would be paying on student debt. So for this year, it's been fixed lower at 6.3% by the government. But there's no guarantee that this is going to be anything like this when the time comes for you to go to uni. So percentages are all very interesting. That allows us to give us a fairly sort of rough idea of what it's going to cost. But let's put some numbers on it. Now, there's a think tank that says that most students, or the average student, will take out around £45,000 of student debt over a 3-year course. And if we apply 6.3% to £45,000, it means that the cost of your debt will be increasing by just under £3,000 per year just in interest. Now, obviously, if RPI comes down, that figure is going to get less. If RPI goes up and the government does not continue to support by fixing it at a lower rate, then that potentially will go up as well. So, for example, if the government wasn't helping out this year, students would be paying 9%. That would add up to about £4,000 increase in interest rather than the £2,835 that it is. Right, so all the time you've got debt outstanding, it will be increasing due to interest. But it will be decreasing because you will be paying some of the money back. So let's look at the loan repayment terms. Now, if you are earning less than £27,295 currently, then there is no expectation of any repayment at all. If you are earning more than that figure though, and I'm going to call that the lower watershed figure, if you are earning more than that lower watershed figure, then anything you earn above that, you will have to pay 9% of that back to the student loan company as a repayment on your student debt. Now for year 13, the current year 13, those thresholds are going to change by the time you leave uni. They will no longer be at £27,295. They will be coming down to £25,000. So if you are earning less than £25,000 gross before any tax, then you will be paying no repayment. But bear in mind that the interest will still be increasing. But if you are earning more than £25,000, then you will have to pay 9% of your earnings over £25,000 back to the student loan company. And that's not a choice, that is a must. Now, if you decide to go abroad, this debt will go with you, I'm afraid. There is no expectation for you not to repay, even though you go down to Australia to work. The exact amount that you will have to pay will depend on the country where you're working, but for most of the first world countries that you will work in, it's going to come out around the same sort of level of £25,000 equivalent in the local currency. Now again, to put some numbers on it, if interest rates stay roughly where they are, if you take out this average amount of £45,000 worth of debt, you will need to be earning more than £56,000 a year before you cover the interest that's already accruing on your debt. So you won't be paying any principal back on your loan until you're earning more than 56k, or until interest rates start to drop down. So even if you get a really well-paid first job, please be prepared to see your debt continue to increase in the short term. And don't worry, everybody's in the same boat. So up until now, we've always spoken about student loan. Everyone knows it as a student loan. But you know what? I think it's worthwhile thinking about what a loan is. Now, a loan is a chunk of money that somebody gives you with an expectation of repayment. Yeah, we can tick that box. It's got an interest rate or a coupon attached to it. We can tick that box as well. But normally, any loan that you get, the more money you borrow, the more money you have to repay every month. Take a car loan out for £5,000, it might cost you £300 a month to repay. You take a car loan out for £15,000, it might cost you £800 a month to repay. The more you borrow, the more you repay. This loan is not like that. The amount that you repay has no effect, or is not affected, I should say, by the amount of money you borrow. If you borrow £45,000, you will repay 9% of income over £25,000. If you borrow £10,000, you will still repay 9% of income over £25,000. The repayment schedule is not affected by the amount of money that you have borrowed. And the other way that it doesn't act like a loan, any normal loan that you take will have an impact on the amount of money that you can borrow in the future, because it makes up part of your credit score. Your student debt does not make up part of your credit score, so it has no effect on the amount of money you can borrow. That might be as an overdraft or a credit card or a mortgage in the future. So it doesn't act like a loan there as well. And I would argue that this overall idea of a student loan is totally wrong. What we are really looking at here is a student tax of 9% on earnings above £25,000. And if you think about it as a tax, that's going to be so much easier to cope with than worrying about this pot of money that has to be repaid. You know, we're all going to pay about £1 million in tax over the course of our lifetimes. We don't wake up in a cold sweat every morning worrying about it. If the tax is there, if we're earning it, we pay it. If we're not earning it, we don't pay it. Your student debt is exactly the same. So I guess all the way through this, you have been sitting there weighing up the pros and cons of debt against opportunity. Is my degree going to be worth it? Well, I can't answer that. That really depends on you. But the University of Kent have done some research, and their research has shown that somebody who gets the right degree will earn about £1 million more over the course of their career than somebody without that degree. So, what is the right degree? There's the caveat. What's the right degree? 50 years ago, any degree was the right degree. Employers were looking for people with a degree. They were getting the top jobs. But only about 8% of your year group was going to uni then, so there wasn't that many people coming away with degrees. By the end of the 1990s into the early 2000s, that number was up to about 30%. That means employers had much more choice. Thirds did not get the top jobs anymore because there were more people with degrees. By the time you graduate, it will be up to about 70% of your year group will have degrees. That means employers have got even more choice. That means two twos, will no longer get the top jobs, the top paid jobs. Thirds will get very little more than a normal set of A-level results. Firsts and 2-1s will still put you in the box seat when it comes to getting the jobs that pay the extra money. So if you are going to be making this investment of £45,000 or thereabouts, you owe it to yourself to come away with the degree that's going to get you the best opportunity to earn that extra money throughout your lifetime. That is going to be a first or a 2-1. So will this debt ever end? Yes, it will. It will end when you pay it all back. That's the principal plus the interest involved. Or here's the other thing. 40 years from the April after you graduate, whatever debt you still have outstanding when it comes to student finance will be wiped out. Now, under the old scheme, which I referred to a little bit earlier on, which was paying higher interest, this was being wiped out after 30 years. But under your scheme, you're paying less interest, but the time that you will be repaying it for has gone from 30 to now 40 years from graduation. So by the time you're in your early 60s, ladies and gentlemen, and that might look like a long way away, you will have no student debt. Yeah, you'll have credit cards and overdrafts and mortgages, car loans and all the rest of it, but you will have no student debt in your early 60s. So how can you keep overall your costs down if you're going to go down this route of going to university? Well, part-time job is obviously one way to improve your finances. If you're staying at home, you probably have already got a part-time job. Keep it going. If you're going to be moving away, make sure you get your CVs in as early as possible to get one of those jobs that's going to be available. Continue to budget. And if you've not looked at budgeting yet and you've not done the budgeting course with us, check that web part of the website out afterwards. It's another one of the topics and you can check out how to put a budget together. Make use of student discounts everywhere. And I've noticed over the last couple of days, many of the banks are doing some fabulous deals to try and encourage you to go and bank with those particular high street banks, whereby they're going to be giving you things like free Amazon Prime for 3 years while you're a student. They're going to be giving you student discount cards for 4 years after you take the account out. All of those things are going to help to make a little bit of a difference when it comes to your spending. And then understand what you want out of your degree. Understand how your spending works, and you have to do that really in conjunction with your budget. If you've got any questions, the student loan website is very good. We will help as well if you need to, but your first port of call generally should be the University Finance Department, who are there to give you as much help and support as they can possibly give throughout your stay through your degree. I still think it's going to be well worthwhile for you guys that are considering university. Yes, there are other ways to get your degree. They are definitely worth looking at, be that through a bursary, be that through a degree level, an apprenticeship, but the vast majority of places will still be going back to university. If you decide to go down this route, understand clearly what it means when you are going into that contract, the debt that you are likely to get into, the way that you need to look at that debt when it comes to being a tax rather than a loan. Really, really important, because mentally that's going to be loads better. Any questions you've got, do get in touch with us. Hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's made things a little bit clearer overall, and thanks very much for listening and watching. Any more resources you want, check out the website.